Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, crews and winds have made headway on that wildfire near Osoyoos. We'll hear about the impact on tourism that is so critical to the region. And Meta has just announced it's blocking news content for Canadian users of Facebook and Instagram. What will that mean for how you find your news? Let us know on the open line. And after 12:30, are you worried about your debt? How can you avoid and manage your debt? We'll talk about financial literacy in our second half hour. I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming as well on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, many Osoyoos residents have been allowed to return to their homes as crews and winds have helped to make progress on the Eagle Bluff wildfire. That fire spread rapidly over the BC-Washington state border near Osoyoos over the weekend, and that prompted evacuation orders for hundreds of properties. Yesterday, those evacuation orders for more than 700 properties were significantly reduced down to 192. However, more than 2,000 properties remain under evacuation alert. Sue McCourtoff is mayor of Osoyoos.
Well, I live right on the lake and close to the border, actually, and it's blue sky. It's calm, and I can see some smoke off to the west over the hills. So there is no smoke or fires in the town of Osoyoos. It's quite a distance away. I know it was mentioned that we have 192 evacuation orders in place. Very few of them are in Osoyoos. Most of them are in Area A or Area C, which is closer to Nighthawk. So they're up in the hills where there are larger tracts of land and farms and people who like to live out near the lakes and out in the hills. But I'll tell you that our fire department, our local fire department, plus all the regional fire departments who came to help, plus the some U.S. fire departments came up, and they have done an amazingly coordinated event. They're obviously all very well trained, very well organized, and in 48 hours, not even 72, somebody said that 48 hours, this fire roared through the hills up above Osoyoos, very close to homes, where those were up at the golf course area, Dividend Ridge. They were, a lot of them were, they were all evacuated for sure. And within 48 hours, the fire had been dealt with and they were back in their homes. So that's pretty amazing, isn't it? And I can't say enough about the crews that came, our own fire department. They're phenomenal. We are so lucky.
That's Sue McCourtoff, mayor of Osoyoos. She was speaking with Stephen Quinn this morning on CBC Radio. Now, McCourtoff says tourism in the town is, quote, open for business, but she advises visitors to check Drive BC or call the town or Destination Osoyoos first. And tourism, as you know, is a huge part of Osoyoos' economy. And joining us now is David McBean, General Manager of the Watermark Beach Resort in Osoyoos. Good afternoon, David. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Well, can you describe for us where you are located in relation to the part of Osoyoos that was under evacuation order?
So the evacuation order was on the west side of Osoyoos, the houses that kind of go up the hills over there. We're in the heart of town, right in the center. We're located right on the beach with Osoyoos Lake just right outside our doors. And, hearing what the mayor was saying earlier, the weather's great, sky's blue here.
And so you were not affected where you were necessarily. What could you see from where you were? What happened for you on Saturday night?
The evacuation order was applying to a bunch of residences on the west side of town. We did have 2 buildings that are staff accommodation for our employees. So we still had to be involved in making sure that we helped them out and brought them to the hotel, made sure they have a safe place to stay. But the resort itself, at first was under no order or alert, and then later in the evening, the west side of downtown Osoyoos that were of downtown specifically was put onto alert later, likely as a precaution. And we didn't have to evacuate. We had a few evacuees that came in to the hotel, and that we checked in and that we housed as well. And really it was just about following information and just making sure everyone was staying well informed about what was happening.
Okay. And so once that alert was put in place, what did that mean for your guests?
The alert came very late into the evening. So with the purpose of an alert is to make sure that you have a plan, that you're ready in case something more urgent happens. And that wouldn't work very well in our environment if the guests didn't know. So we were in a position that we had to call our guests in the middle of the night. Some of them were sleeping, and let them know that we were under alert, that there was no need to evacuate, but that they know and that they have all the information, and so that they can make any decisions that they wanted for themselves. Pretty much everyone that we spoke to overnight about the alert stayed. And some people, then made some decisions the day after based on everything else that was going on.
Okay. Did some decide to leave then?
Some people decided to leave early. Mm-hmm. Not as much about safety, but a lot of them just wondering what their vacation experience would be like if the smoke had gotten worse, or if orders got extended and things like that.
What could you see from where you were?
Well, we can see the hills and the mountains to the west. The Okanagan is a valley in the middle of the mountains, and on the west side of that valley, you can see during the daytime. You see the smoke. You see the white smoke that's over there. But at night, that same fire, when it gets dark, lights up bright and orange. It's quite dramatic the way it looks. So you're seeing this large orange that's on the hilltop, and it was coming, and it was quite long because it had moved so quickly from the United States and had moved such a long distance.
Right.
But then daytime comes again, and it just looks like white smoke again. And then in the nighttime again, it comes, and you see the orange again. So. And
what about today? I mean, we're hearing how much apparently things have improved because of the wind and the fire crews' efforts.
Yeah, you see a bit of smoke in the hills to a distance away, and the smoke seems to be staying over there. It literally is blue sky and that warm Okanagan weather that you come used to over here. There's families, there's kids in the beach, on the water, and everyone's kind of doing vacation thing over here. It's something that you're kind of seeing in the distance. Mm-hmm. To echo the mayor's comments from earlier today, she's absolutely right. They did a fantastic job. The wind brought this fire in so quickly, and to see the Osoyoos Fire Department do what they did, protecting homes that it got near to that are kind of right on that edge of town, and how professional they were at doing that. And then BC Wildfire came in. It was like watching an air show. The amount of aircraft and helicopters and things that they.
And overall, what does this mean for your resort? What impact does this wildfire? I know you're not in that zone, but the interior, the South Okanagan, tends to see this now, right? Every year. What impact does this all have on your business?
In the short term, for sure, it's had an impact on bookings. We still have quite a few guests here. It's not. The hotel by no means is empty. It's not a ghost town. There's still lots of families. There's kids. There's people dining in the restaurant. There's people eating on the patio in front of the water. Has it had an impact on some occupancy in the short term? Absolutely. But August is still looking like a very, very busy month. And really, as guests are calling and asking these questions about what's happening, we point them to Drive BC, we point them to the air quality index online, we point them to BC Wildfire, and so that they're getting that information from a factual, reputable source. And once they get that information, then they're really, at that point, they're actually quite comfortable in coming here. There's also a lot of hotels and businesses here that actually, prior to the wildfire, have cameras that show the mountains, that show the lake, and outside of their buildings that kind of show the landscape. And we point a lot of people to that as well. When we were asking smoke, we take a look at the live camera outside of our hotel, or even from one of the other businesses, and they see the blue skies. You can see the mountains, you can see the water, you can see people on the boats. So really just giving them the right information and let them make the choice themselves.
Check Drive BC, check that air quality index. Destination Osoyoos is another place the mayor pointed to as well. No before you go, essentially. David, good to hear, the news for today. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the weather holds, those winds hold, and everything just continues to improve. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
You take care. That's David McBean, General Manager of the Watermark Beach Resort in Osoyoos. It's 12:17 now, 1:17 in the Mountain Time Zone. You're with BC Today. We're on CBC Radio 1, live streaming too on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on YouTube on CBC Vancouver's page. And we're going to talk about online news right now, because all news content will be removed from Facebook and Instagram for users in Canada starting today. And the process will be complete within weeks. And this news just broke this morning. That is according to Meta, the company that owns both Facebook and Instagram. And this follows Ottawa passing Bill C-18. That's Canada's Online News Act back in June. Now, that law requires Meta and Google to pay news organizations for news content that they share or repurpose on their platforms. Both companies have expressed their opposition to this bill, and in a testing phase, Meta previously limited some news access to a number of users. And now the social media giant says all news content, whether it is published by Canadian or international outlets, will no longer be viewable by people in Canada on Meta's platforms. Well, we're asking you today, how do you feel about this step by Meta to remove Canadian news, news from Canadian viewers on its platforms? And how will this affect how you get your news? Do you think big tech companies should have to pay news outlets for their content? Canadian outlets, you can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me now to take your calls is Alfred Hermida, a professor of journalism at the University of BC. And it's at the UBC's School of Journalism, Writing and Media. Alfred, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for joining us. What's your reaction to Meta's decision today?
Well, Meta has been slowly pulling away from news. Increasingly, news has not been that important to Facebook and Instagram, but Facebook and Instagram are far more important to news outlets. It doesn't surprise me. They do not want to be forced into a position where they have to pay for news. But it's more than about paying for news. They just don't want to be regulated. They don't want to be told what to do by the government.
Okay. We're also joined now by Jesse Miller with Mediated Reality. He's an expert on social media. And Jesse, thank you very much for joining us as well. You just heard a bit of what Alfred said there in terms of his reaction and what this means for a company like Meta. They simply are opposed or averse to being regulated overall, but also when it comes to this particular news. He was saying that news organizations need Meta more than it needs them. What's your reaction?
I do agree with Alfred, and it's a hard argument to counter, because a lot of news organizations in Canada have, for the better part of a decade, been giving free content to Meta for the purpose of amplifying their messages, for the purpose of getting more stories to Canadians themselves. And as much as Facebook or Meta as a whole tries to argue that they're not a news company, we do know the majority of Canadians do actually search and find their news content on these social media platforms, whether it be from shared links or whether it be them just choosing it as a primary source of searching for information in their community or from across Canada itself.
Okay, can we talk a little bit about that? Because Alfred, you were saying people are not using Facebook necessarily for news. So what are the habits that Canadians have now? Alfred?
Well, the internet and social media is the main source of news for Canadians, and then it's television. But on the platforms, we're seeing a less use of Facebook for news. This current year, it's about a third of Canadians who get their news from Facebook or say that's part of the source. But the thing is, people don't necessarily go to Facebook looking for news, and that's the big difference. You're looking at people who are trying to catch up with what their friends are doing.
Right.
Maybe they've got some interest groups and they happen to see a CBC headline and click on it. So it's really the casual news consumer for where news is not why they go to Facebook or Instagram, but it's part of their overall social experience.
Okay, and perhaps it might be useful for our audience to just, understand what got us here in the first place. Let's maybe roll back the clock a little bit and talk about Bill C-18, the Online News Act, and what the argument was for introducing it in the first place. Jesse, what did we hear from the federal government on that?
Well, with Bill C-18, we're shaping out this framework that essentially requires these digital giants to develop agreements with Canadian news providers. And the thing here is that I find it concerning because we think about rural information, the idea of rural news, communities that are not as big as, let's say, Metro Vancouver or Toronto. And the idea that we have these kind of mom and pop news agencies still kind of operating, we have to remember we do have conglomerates that own news agencies across Canada, and the small newspaper that's kind of picked up for free in your community may be somewhat regurgitated content from a writer in Toronto or Vancouver themselves. So within this idea of where we're looking to kind of argue the point, C-18 is still very kind of ambiguous to the majority of Canadians. They don't really understand it. But a good analogy in this instance is just imagine if I was walking on the street and you asked me for directions to a location, a space, and that, my answer is something I provide to you, and you're happy that I've given you good information, which is what Google and Facebook tend to do in the sense of a link. But now I, as the person who's received the request, actually have to pay the destination a sum to get their client there. And that's where Google and Facebook are arguing and saying we shouldn't have to pay the government to allow Canadians to find source information. And so the whole as an umbrella is somewhat an argumentative point from either side of the way people are looking at where they stand on this. So I can argue and say I appreciate the idea that we need more Canadian revenue coming into Canadian journalism, but at the same time, I also want Canadians to be able to have an open internet where they can source information that's going to be beneficial, especially if it's from their communities.
Okay, and so Alfred, what do you make of that argument then from, I guess, from either side on this?
Well, the issue with Bill C-18 is that it was trying to fix the problem with the business models of news. In the 60s and 70s, newspapers made between 20 and 30% profit, up to 30% profit. Essentially, newspapers were a license to print money because of advertising and classifieds. That's moved online. And now Google and Meta have 75% of the digital advertising market in Canada. What the news publishers are saying is, hold on, we've lost our advertising to these digital new platform companies. We want some of that money back. Essentially, their business model doesn't work anymore. Advertising has moved online. Classifieds have moved online.
Right.
And this is the argument of Bill C-18 is saying, well, let's in some ways penalize Google and Facebook for being much better at creating an advertising system that Canadians want to use. And it doesn't address other issues around, how does it help local news outlets? How do you support innovation? How do you help to communities get information that's in their public interest? There's all sorts of other questions that Bill C-18 doesn't deal with that are really important to Canadians and to the future of journalism in Canada.
Okay, so so much to unpack there, right? That it sounds like from what the tech companies are saying, but also what needs to happen when it comes to news, news outlets and the survival of news, as Jesse was talking about, especially the smaller news outlets and local coverage in small communities. I know that's something that we've heard from our audience here on this program when we've talked about media in the past, how important local coverage is to them. We're taking your calls right now. I'm joined by Jesse Miller and Alfred Hermida. Today, this morning, Facebook and Instagram's parent company Meta announced it has begun the process of ending news availability in Canada. And so Canadian users of Facebook and Instagram will not be able to see or share news. And this is in response to Bill C-18, the Online News Act, which was meant to make online giants pay for news content shared on their platforms. We're taking your reaction on the open line here on BC Today and asking you, how will this affect how you consume news? And what do you think of this debate? Should tech companies have to pay for that content? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Bill writes, hopefully this will bring back newspapers. I had a great 33-year career at it, and it was a great trade. Bill, thank you very much for that. Padra is joining us from Salt Spring Island. Hi there, Padra.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well. Thanks so much for calling. What are your thoughts on Meta's announcement today, and where do you get your news? Does Facebook play a role in that?
No, actually, I don't even use Facebook. I never have. I do have an Instagram for my band, but that's about it. I totally agree with the sentiment behind the last person that was talking there about the money that's gone out of the advertising. And I obviously can't articulate it with data the same way that he did, but I think intrinsically that Facebook is a for-profit company. They're making a lot of money off of the advertising, and so they're actually making money every time somebody shares that news article, right? And so why shouldn't they pay, just like the advertisers pay a fraction of a penny every time there's a click? Why shouldn't they pay for that? They're using something that was made not by them in order to make some money. I mean, the worst thing that happens is that they pass that cost on to their advertisers or something too, right? And so then isn't it funny that they're spending a bunch of money setting up, I don't know what they're going to do, but to block the news being shared, they're going to have to look at every post and see if it's a newspaper clipping, So they're going to spend a lot of money to block this instead of just paying it out. And everybody knows their stocks keep going up and they're making a bucket of cash. So,
okay.
Why shouldn't they pay?
And Padra, can I ask you, you said you don't use Facebook, you use Instagram for your band. Where do you find your news?
I kind of do it the old-fashioned way. I just search for things. I have a few subscriptions to various online newspapers.
Okay.
And a lot of stuff comes through Reddit, right? I don't particularly contribute to Reddit, but it's easy to read things there, and it's got all the latest stuff.
Okay.
People, internet geeks love conglomerating things for likes, right?
Yeah, the likes are so important. Yeah, Padra, thank you so much.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We harness that power.
good
Thanks
to hear from you on Salt Spring Island. And the statement from Meta today explaining their decision says, as they begin the process of ending news availability in order to comply with the Online News Act, the statement reads, the legislation is based on the incorrect premise that Meta benefits unfairly from news content shared on our platforms, when the reverse is true. News outlets voluntarily share content on Facebook and Instagram to expand their audiences and help their bottom line. So that statement coming from Meta this morning as it announced its decision. My guests are Alfred Hermida, a professor of journalism at UBC, and Jesse Miller with Mediated Reality. He's a social media expert, and we are getting reaction from this now on our open line too, asking you what you make of this decision by Meta. Where do you get your news, and how does something like this affect how you consume news? Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Alfred, I'll go to you then. You were touching there on what this means for news outlets and how they have or have not been able to adjust and adapt to the new reality. What do news and media outlets need to do then?
But what we're seeing, particularly with some more local outlets, they're trying to build closer connections to their communities. So social media is great to reach lots of people, but it doesn't necessarily reach people who really care about particular issues in that community. So you're basically dealing in numbers. And a lot of the time, the casual news consumer might see a headline and click on it because that piques their interest, but they never come back to your website or tune into your show. And what we're seeing, particularly with sort of some of the journalism startups and some of the ones that are focused on particular topics like climate change, they're saying, well, we want to reach people who really care about this. We want to engage with them. We want to turn them into loyal news consumers who will come back and not rely on just something popping up on their feed. And that's in some ways the shift we're seeing here with media companies that have relied on that sort of casual drive-by traffic coming from Facebook saying, well, okay, we need to now think in terms of how can we foster that better sense of community, of belonging, of connecting to that news outlet and what it means to you.
And so, Jesse, what role? I mean, social media at its core was about connecting people, right? So, what role can social media play in encouraging that local, community-driven topic and passion-driven content?
Well, the reality of it is we're seeing it on other platforms. I mean, the rise of TikTok has shown us the value of not only creating community, but also sourcing information that really does not only educate, but illuminate some of the issues that we face as a society. And so, TikTok is a very powerful algorithm that very much puts people into silos of comfort where they're surprised by how much information they're receiving. Interestingly enough, I mean, if we saw CBC have a TikTok account that got more content engagements because of the uniqueness of what they were sharing, we would be arguing whether or not CBC should be broadcasted in let's say, cable spaces, and if TikTok was a better platform for it. The thing is that with something like CBC, whether it be on radio, whether it be in print, web, whether it be across our television or radio signals, the evolution of consumership of news media has to go into these social spaces. And so whether it's a small organization or a large organization, it does come down to the content itself. And just as a note, I mean, Alfred and I are both educators and we both work in post-secondary, but the reality of it is we choose to participate in this space. And I don't know if Alfred's been remunerated today, but I know I'm not. And the beautiful part about that is that I'm choosing to participate because I want to help create content that can educate. We see that in social media spaces as well. When people choose to take the time to create content to educate other people, yes, there is a benefit that if your channel or your video goes viral, you're starting to see money coming in, but that is direct to the content creator itself. And that itself is a very powerful tool for, let's say, the social media communities to really embrace. And so for the majority of users, yes, we might see people choose to search something on Facebook because they're already there. And as Alfred mentioned earlier, already engaging with family and friends. The news content itself has been voluntarily put into these spaces by news agencies across Canada. And that limitation now would be very concerning.
Now, you mentioned CBC. There is no formal statement from CBC today. It's CBC Radio Canada's corporate position that has been stated is that the Online News Act will help level the playing field and contribute to a healthy news ecosystem in Canada at a time when the majority of digital ad revenues go to the big tech companies, end quote. That is the corporate position on the Online News Act. And let me just read a couple of emails here that we've gotten. Ben writes, I use actual news sites for news, such as CBC and BBC News, but unfortunately, I know many people who only ever see news that others have shared on Facebook. This isn't ideal, but it's better than not getting any news at all. I hope some sort of compromise can be reached. Caleb in Cobble Hill writes, I think this is a win for journalism. With no news on social media, I hope that it will reduce the rage echo chamber of reposting clickbait, false and questionable articles presented as real reporting that has consumed social and political issues of the last few years. That's a good point to end on. Let me just wrap up with you, Alfred. What about disinformation and misinformation that we have heard is an issue with these social media sites?
Well, I think that will be one of the concerns if reputable news organizations are no longer on Facebook or Instagram. It sort of leaves the space open for everybody else. And for the casual news consumer, the person who's just going to Facebook to catch up with what's happening with their friends, they may see a headline and not realize that it's not coming from a reputable news organization, but they're not getting anything else to counter that. And I think that's in some ways a fear here, that the space will be open to more mis and disinformation. And Facebook has a very, very patchy record in dealing with this.
It's going to be interesting to see what this step will mean for users, for news outlets as well. Thank you so much for joining us with your quick and immediate reaction. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Alfred.
Take care, both of you. Jesse Miller is founder of Mediated Reality, that is a social media education company. And Alfred Hermida is a professor at UBC's School of Journalism, Writing, and Media. It is 12:36 now, 1:36 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today here on CBC on radio, live streaming as well on cbc.ca/BC and on CBC Gem. And you can join us in our next half hour. I'd love to hear from you as we talk about interest rates affecting debt and asking you, are you worried about your debt levels? We'll talk about ways to avoid and manage your debt and your budget and financial literacy as well. That's coming up after the CBC News Update with Michelle Morton.
Good afternoon. Here are the headlines from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Winds have pushed back the Eagle Bluff wildfire that threatened the town of Osoyoos over the weekend, and hundreds of people are being allowed to return home after being evacuated. There are less than 200 homes still under evacuation order. That's down from 732 over the weekend. In Surrey, with hot, dry weather in the forecast, this city is joining a number of other Metro Vancouver municipalities by bringing in water restrictions. Starting Friday, all lawn watering is banned, but the city says watering trees, shrubs, flowers, and vegetable gardens can be maintained. Surrey RCMP are renewing their call for witnesses to come forward after a 31-year-old man died from a hit-and-run incident over the weekend. He was hit by a blue sedan at about 12:30 Saturday morning in the 8200 block of 128th Street. The RCMP would also like to speak to anyone who might have dash cam video of the incident. And the RCMP in Kamloops says no arrests have been made after shooting yesterday around 5 p.m. It happened on the North Shore, close to where Sherbert Drive intersects with Richmond Avenue. Police say one person was taken to hospital, but haven't said if the shooting was targeted. In the forecast, sunshine for today, highs of 23 and a few clouds for tonight with a low of 14. Tomorrow, some clouds, but clear in the afternoon, highs of 23, and clear in the evening, cooling down to 14. Now back to BC Today with Michelle Eliot.
Thank you very much. You know, you mentioned the watering restrictions. Let me just, I just adjusted my microphone, and so my hair is all askew. You know, live radio, live streaming.
That's why we love it, though.
No. Just catch me in the middle of doing that. Yeah, I mean, yours looks perfect, as always. So
thank you.
This is what do they call it? BTS, behind the scenes at BC Today. Michelle fixing her hair a little bit.
A little bit. I have the Princess Leia look kind of going on here.
You do with the headsets there. Yeah. Michelle, nice to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
That's Michelle Morton in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're on Radio 1, live streaming as well on CBC Gem at cbc.ca/BC and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. And we were just talking about Facebook and Instagram. If you do rely on those sites to access your news coverage, you may be affected by that decision by Meta to block news content to Canadians. Now, you can keep up to date with CBC's latest news stories by downloading the free CBC News app. And you can find it on cbcnews.ca, on CBC Gem, and on CBC Listen. It's 12:39 now, 1:39 in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, rising interest rates have raised our stress levels too. And last month, the Bank of Canada hiked its benchmark rate again by another 25 basis points to 5%. And that followed back-to-back increases over the last year, all to try to get inflation down to a target of 2%. Word is that the central bank is still prepared to raise that rate even further. Now, how does it affect you and your debt, your mortgage, your line of credit? We're taking your calls right now. Are you worried about your debt level? What are you doing to try and avoid it or tackle it and manage your budget and your debt? And what are your questions about increasing your financial literacy? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, it's star or pound 690. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me here in studio is Murray Baker, Manager of Financial Empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. Murray, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I was a little bit surprised that Family Services of Greater Vancouver had a financial empowerment department. Why was that important?
Well, it's important because finances really play such an important role in family relationships, and they really permeate all aspects of relationships and the family. And when people are stressed about finances, it impacts those relationships and the ability to have a good, coherent family unit.
Have it thrive.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And so how stressed are families right now then?
They're extremely stressed. In the time I've been working in this field, I have not seen people this stressed. When we look at inflation, and we've seen the recent figures that showed inflation is tending downwards, but behind that, food is still going up substantially, over 9%. Mortgage rates are going up, and that's being translated or passed on to renters. And those are two essentials that the clients we work with are really being impacted for. And, you know, trying to make ends meet when your rent's going up at 20, 30, 40% and food's going up close to 10%, very difficult for families to cope.
You're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place there, aren't you? Because the inflation affecting food, it is the what's been most stubborn when it comes to inflation, and as well interest rates to try and tackle that affects you and your debt as well. And so what are people doing to get by or to manage?
Well, and that's what makes it difficult for a lot of people who are maybe in the lower income bracket. There may be seniors who we are seeing really struggle, newcomers as well. It's very difficult because there's not a lot to turn to. So for instance, seniors cannot run out and get a part-time job. So for them, it's very difficult. And what we're seeing happen is people cutting back on food. In some cases, and this is obviously very dangerous, is people are cutting back on things such as medication if they're having to pay out of pocket for that. And one of the dangerous things we're seeing is people accessing predatory lenders like payday loans and other predatory type lenders to make ends meet. And that really sucks them into a downward spiral of debt, because some of them are paying 35, 45% interest on those loans because they don't have access to more affordable credit to help make ends meet.
You mentioned seniors and low-income families. Who is most affected?
Certainly seniors are one of the biggest areas that we're seeing. And what's heartbreaking is to see people who have worked all their lives, they're seniors, and they're on the verge or are homeless because they just can't afford the rents in Canada. So, and particularly in the lower mainland. So what we do is we work with a lot of seniors, for example, who are struggling that way, and see if we can connect them to benefits. So for instance, a senior, if they're low income, they may be able to access the SAFER grant, which gives them a supplement each month to help pay their rent. Or if they're having struggles at a particular time, accessing the rent bank, which provides some sort of some loans to help get them by through those difficult times.
Okay, the SAFER grant to help toward rent, accessing the rent bank as well. And we'd love to hear more resources from you that you do share with families and seniors who come to you. My guest, Murray Baker, who's Manager of Financial Empowerment with Family Services of Greater Vancouver. We're asking you, how concerned are you about your debt level? What are you doing to manage it, to avoid debt? And what are your questions about financial literacy as well? It's one of those things that we didn't really learn. I certainly didn't in school. And so what would you like to learn about it? What tips would you like? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. And we were talking about seniors, resources available to them. I believe someone on the line right now is joining us. Hi, Judy, joining us from Gibson's. Welcome.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm well. Thanks so much for giving us a call.
Good. Well, when I was younger, I was completely irresponsible with money,
Ah,
and I was also involved with wanting to be prestigious, so having a gold American Express card, that kind of thing.
ah,
And I got myself into really bad debt, and I had to file a proposal. I didn't go bankrupt, but I filed a proposal. This is while I was still very active. I'm 74 now,
Okay.
very active in my career, and I paid off all the debt through the proposal.
and where do
And I
you
never-
where do you file that proposal to?
I went to there's a debtors association that you can go to and get advice.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it now, but it's a publicly funded organization where you
Okay.
can go. I'm sure your guest knows that.
Sure. Yes.
And they referred me to an accounting firm that manages these kinds of things. And I guess the accounting firm makes money as part of the management of the proposal. So I was probably I'm guessing my early 50s when I went through this.
Mm-hmm.
And I never took out another credit card. I never tried to rebuild my credit. I just started paying cash for everything.
Wow.
And today, at 74, I have a credit card. I owe nothing on it. I have no debt, but it's handy to have if I have to go online and buy something.
Sure.
But I never buy anything unless I can pay for it right away.
Yeah. That sounds like certainly a good rule. What a story you tell. And Judy, what got you to that point in your
Well,
50s?
The utter and complete horror of the debt that I was in and that I couldn't manage it.
Yeah.
It was just horrific. And there was no rescue out there for me. I had to deal with it on my own. And suddenly I became, a person who needed help. And I went and got the help. And I took their advice and did exactly what they told me to do. And I was ashamed. I was utterly and completely ashamed that I had gotten myself into that situation. But today, I am glad to say that I have a 760 credit rating.
Wow, Judy, you're the example, and I'd love to. I'm going to ask Murray certainly about where they can go in order to file this proposal. What was it like for you to do that? What was that process? I guess what was involved in your proposal, and how did you get out of it?
It was humiliating because the people at the accounting firm, it was one of the major big accounting firms that has an arm that handles bankruptcies and proposals.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a whole department that's involved with it. And it was humiliating because they treated me like a child. They treated me like somebody who had been completely irresponsible, which I had been. And they held me to, I had to give them financial reports all the time. They held me to a budget. They held me to not spending any money. They held me accountable.
Wow.
And that was the structure I needed to really take it all in and really change my life completely.
Wow.
The one thing that helped me during that time, because I was still needing to go online and pay for things with a credit card, my brother and sister-in-law gave me a secondary credit card on their account, and I was able to use that until I finally got my very own card in my own name. But I always paid it off. Always paid it off. Even today, if I go out shopping today and I buy myself a new top or something and I use my credit card, I go home, I open my account online, and I pay the bill.
Okay. I mean, wow, it strikes me when you talk about the shame involved in that, but I hear the pride in your voice now.
I am very proud, but I was so shamed and so humiliated and so deserving of it at the time.
Oh.
I really felt badly that I had done that and done that to myself. And of course, I come from a family, my brother's an accountant, and I was running my own business. So, I was running my own business while I was doing all this.
Oh, my, what a weight on you. What a weight.
Anyway, I'm 100% debt-free, and I'm loving my life, and I'm on a senior's income. I'm on a fixed senior's income. So I'm also, being very careful about what I buy.
Yeah. What a story you tell, Judy. I'm so glad, and thank you very much for sharing that. I'm sure that was a little bit hard to share, right? The sort of shame.
I'm sure half the world has heard it now, so everybody in the world knows.
Well, you tell the tale well. Thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
All the best to you.
Okay.
Murray, so much to go through there. First, we'll get to the creditors and the proposal, the sort of practical information for people. But can you just touch on that shame that, I feel really, I'm saddened to hear that, but that shame that's associated with having debt.
Yeah, and that's often the case when people have debt, and it's interesting because you can drive through Vancouver and you see nice houses, you see fancy cars, and you think everybody is doing well financially. The reality is a lot of people are struggling. Close to half the population are saying they're within $200 of not being able to make their payments each month. So, it's more common than people think, and oftentimes people feel very isolated. They think I'm the only one, or there's, what have I done wrong, or I've failed, and that's not the case. And when we work with clients, we work in a trauma-informed, non-judgmental approach. We don't care how you got in the situation. The point is, what can we do to support you in terms of strategizing and getting out of that situation? And that's what's important, because it can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
So the caller doesn't have to feel ashamed at all, because, and in fact, as she said, she should feel very proud because she pulled herself out.
She sure did.
And it was what she learned from her experience to get on a good financial footing.
And she sought help, right?
Absolutely.
And I think we have a caller next who is doing just that. Craig, joining us from Powell River. Hi, Craig. Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
I am fine. And what's your situation, and what would you like to know?
The situation is that I worked in film, and then I got COPD, which is like a bronchial thing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, long story short, I left film, and then of course the pandemic hit. Anyways, the problem is, or not the problem, is now my wife is gainfully employed. We're in Powell River, and I don't know whether we should be doing our taxes together, or I might be dragging her down financially. I bought a house up here, still paying the mortgage. I just don't know whether we should combine. I don't like spending her money. I like to keep myself independent financially of her money. But I don't know whether we should do our taxes together or separately.
Okay, so taxes specifically is your question?
Well, I guess it's general, just because as the mortgage rates rise, my debts increase, but of course my income does not. I have no actual income.
Okay.
So it's more, I suppose taxes are my main question.
Yeah, so you yourself, you had to retire from your job because of a medical condition. You've gotten married, and you'd like to know your wife is making an income, and whether you should tie your incomes together for tax purposes. What would be best for someone like that in this situation? Of course, not specific advice to Craig, but thank you very much for calling. Glad you did. Generally, what would your advice be?
Well, generally, if you're a married couple, CRA considers you a couple and that you should file together. And in some cases, and in this situation, it may be beneficial because one person is off work and the other person is working. There may be some benefits. And we've seen, for example, couples that have not filed together and then one passes away. And because they never filed, in CRA's eyes, they were not a couple and they weren't able to receive the other person's CPP as a survivor. So, there are some things to consider in those situations. So that's always an important consideration when you're looking at that. And, in situations like that, there's other benefits that you may qualify for when you're a couple. And again, it depends, of course, on those benefits, whether you have kids and factors that all go into the calculations.
Okay, so something to consider there when you're making your decision, Craig. Thank you so much for the call. All the best to you in Powell River. Let's head up north now. Eileen is calling us from Smithers. Hi, Eileen.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure. What do you want to say about debt and your story?
Well, I had a mortgage that I was renewing every 5 years, and this in 2019 would have been the tail end of it, but with about maybe $20,000 left, and I wanted to clear that right off. So I started searching online, and I came across Dave Ramsey. He's a financial. He is a nationally syndicated host of the Dave Ramsey show in the States.
Okay.
And I'm really hoping that I can come across someone who is equivalent in Canada, because there are things with the States that don't relate to us.
Right.
But anyway, I followed his program. He's got anyone could go on YouTube and type in Dave Ramsey 7 Baby Steps to Wealth. And I followed that, and he has like this 7 steps that you. So the first one would be to set aside $1,000 cash, because that's going to be your cushion, and you don't use it, but it's there to reassure you that you have this cushion. And then you tuck that away, and then you start attacking your debt in the order of, some people would go for the percentage rate or the smallest to the largest. He recommends smallest to largest. So I followed all of that.
Eileen.
And so 5 years later, I have my mortgage paid off.
Wow.
And I have also about $20,000 of debt paid off. And I'm still shocked at how I did it. Because I don't get the kind of, it's just weird how it all flows into place. Like,
wow.
His suggestions are, like just sell everything. I mean, even your kids if you have to.
Oh my goodness, Eileen, thank you so much. I'm gonna get some advice from Murray here about that Dave Ramsey, if there's an equivalent here in Canada. But way to go in 5 years, being able to pay it off. I just have about a minute left here, Murray, but I don't know if you know that, but maybe some resources for people would be helpful.
Yeah, and certainly there are resources in terms of looking at that. We have actually some resources on our Family Services of Greater Vancouver website. The other thing that we offer is free one-to-one coaching, and it's confidential, trauma-informed, and as I say, free. And we'll sit down and we'll look at your situation. If you have debt, what is the best strategy to pay it off? Are there some financial goals that we can set and help you towards that? And the other thing that we do is we offer a benefit wayfinder, which helps you find if there's benefits that you're not receiving that you may be eligible for.
You mentioned some already. That's the Family Services of Greater Vancouver is where you can go. Really useful and helpful information. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Great to meet you. Murray Baker is Manager of Financial Empowerment at Family Services of Greater Vancouver. Thanks so much to everyone who called in. Really appreciate it. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks for listening and watching to BC Today. We'll talk tomorrow.